I am very thankful to Barbie for singing the song. I told her if she didn't with the children's sermon, I'd have to for the sermon, because we're all sitting and thinking that song. You hear the story, the words just go on and on. So I'm glad we got that out of our system. But, so thank you, Barbie. But where is God? Where is God? Sometimes we're not so sure, though. Sometimes we're not so sure. There once was a man, a very weary man. He was weary of his city. He was weary of his community. He was weary of his house, his family, of life in general. He was just a very weary man. Then one day, he heard about a magical city where everything was just as it should be. And after contemplating this for a few days, he made up his mind. He was going. He was going to the magical city. So the very next morning, he got up early, he packed his bag, and out the door he went. Through the city gates, out into the countryside, he was free. He was headed to the magical city. After a couple of days traveling, he came to a dark forest. Now, forests in those days were dangerous places to be. Wild animals, bandits tended to hang out there. But if he was going to go to the magical city, he had to go through that forest. So in he went. He traveled for a couple of days with the trees overhanging. It was almost an eternal twilight inside that forest. But he could tell when it was getting close to nighttime because it would get even darker. And so after a couple of days, he was weary and he decided he needed to get some sleep. But how was he going to determine which way to go the next morning because he could get all turned around? So he took his shoes off and he pointed them in the direction that he wanted to continue going. Well, unbeknownst to our weary man, there was a jokester, a trickster who lived in that forest. And while the man was sleeping, the trickster came and he picked up the man's shoes and turned them the other way. The man got up in the morning not knowing that his shoes had been turned around. He put them on and he started on his way. After a couple of days' journey, he came to the edge of the forest and he was thankful that he was finally out of that darkened place, that dangerous place. But as he traveled on, boy, things started to look familiar. And as he got closer and moved further, and then he spotted it, the magical city. Boy, it looks familiar. And it's not as big as I had envisioned, he thought. But he traveled on, this must be the magical city. So he traveled on, he came to the city gates, and wow, these are really familiar. And he traveled into the city and looked around, and the people looked familiar, the houses looked familiar. He kept walking, and pretty soon he came to a familiar street, a familiar house, a familiar door. He knocked on the door, and some very familiar people opened it and welcomed him in. And there he lived, happily ever after, in the magical city. Where is God? Where is God? Jesus was traveling into Jericho. Luke makes it appear as if he is simply traveling through. He wasn't going to stay a great while. But crowds of people wanted to hear him. Crowds of people wanted to see him and touch him. They heard that there was power there. And they wanted a taste. They wanted to see something. And so people followed him. There was another man that wanted to see Jesus too. His name was Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, his name actually means pure, righteous. People probably thought it was a joke. Zacchaeus, pure, righteous. You heard Marvin tell us. So he was a tax collector. He wasn't just, and we talked about tax collectors, how people despised and hated these people. But did you see? Some translations actually say he was a ruler of tax collectors. He wasn't just your run-of-the-mill tax collector. He was a leader of the tax collectors, a chief of the tax collectors. Can you imagine how they despised this man? Pure, righteous. You're pulling my leg. But he wanted to see Jesus. He wanted to see him. He heard all these stories about this man. And he went up and he could see the crowds, and he knew he was not a very tall man. There was no way that he was going to be able to see over the crowds. And being chief of the tax collectors and very hated and very despised, oh, it's Zacchaeus. People were not going to let him in. You know that accidental sidestep we take. People were not going to let him in. He was not going to get anywhere close to seeing Jesus. But he thought to himself, how can I just get a glimpse? Just see him for a moment, to see this man that everyone is talking about. And he could see the path that Jesus was taking, and he thought that he calculated, and he ran on ahead, and he found a tree. We're told it's a sycamore tree. He climbed up into the sycamore tree, and there he waited. He waited for Jesus just to pass by. And he calculated very well. He calculated exactly right. Except he did not count on Jesus stopping right under the tree. And then Jesus looked up. And then what happened? It's not in the text. But what did everybody else do too? They look up and they see this grown man sitting in a tree. Can you imagine? I mean, this is not in the text. But can you imagine just for an instant that Zacchaeus was humiliated? All of these people who hate him already see him hanging up there in a tree. And then what does Jesus do? He calls him by name. Zacchaeus, come down here. What are you doing up there in that tree? Come down here. I want to go to your house today. And everybody's face is, he knows his name. He's going to go to his house. Well, what is this teacher thinking? He's a tax collector. He's chief of tax collector. He'll pollute himself. He'll dirty himself. And the crowd can't understand it. They cannot understand why Jesus would want to go to this sinner's house. But Jesus goes. He doesn't care what people are saying. He knew that Zacchaeus needed him. And so he goes to Zacchaeus' house. And then look at the translation very carefully. It's not past tense. It's not future tense. It's present. In Jesus' presence, it is the eternal now. I give away half of everything I possess. Half of everything that I own, I give away to the poor. If I have cheated anyone, I'll give them 4 times. 4 times what I took. Maybe he was sitting there with his checkbook, bags of gold hanging. We don't know. It's not in the text. But it's in the present tense. I give away half of everything I possess. Half of everything that I own. And Jesus says, salvation has come to this home. Where is God? Where is God? This is a question that we've all asked. We've all asked it at some point in our lives. Atheists, I think they asked the question and they started off towards that magical city and they somehow got lost in the forest. Looking for God and they never found. But we've all looked. Some of us went to seminary to find God. Some of us traveled overseas to faraway lands, faraway countries to find God. Some of us tried to find God in a bottle, in a can of pills, a bottle of pills, drugs, alcohol, anything that will make us happy for a moment. Surely God must be there. But Jesus says, wait a minute, you've all climbed trees. You've all climbed up a tree or two in your life. In your search for me. In your search for God. Don't go pointing fingers at those who drink or do drugs. You've all climbed a tree or two. And Jesus has stood beneath that tree in which you had climbed and called to you. Called you by name. He said, won't you come down? What are you doing up in that tree? I'm right here. Let me in. Let me come into your home. Let me be with you. And it's at this point the gospel of Jesus Christ should have a warning label. Because when you let Jesus Christ in, when you let him in, it will change your life. It will change who you are. Zacchaeus gave away half of everything he owned. He gave 4 times to anybody he had cheated. It will change your life. Maybe you find yourself up in a tree on this very day. Jesus is standing underneath that tree, calling you by name. Won't you come down? Come down here. I want to go to your house today. Let him in. Do what Zacchaeus did. Welcome him in. And salvation will come to your house. Salvation will come. Does that mean you'll never climb a tree again? Probably not. Maybe. But we've all climbed many trees. But we'll know that Jesus is still there, always under that tree, still calling to you. And salvation can come whenever you want. Let him in.